Hey guys, Pastor Tim here. It's so good to have you along with us as we are continuing on in our study on taking the future seriously. We pray that this has been a blessing to you. Again, if you're watching this, we ask you to share it with somebody. We hope you'll leave us a comment down below so we can respond to that. And just let us know if you like it or not, or if you're learning anything, or maybe you have an opinion about something or a question. Be glad to try to answer those as best I can. Tonight we're talking about resistance is futile. Resistance is futile. And if you're not sure where that statement came from, if you're a Star Trek fan, I grew up watching Star Trek, and I realize Star Trek is kind of more my generation than younger people today. Uh, Even though I grew up also watching Star Wars when I was a junior in high school, is when the first Star Wars episode came out. Future Hope, I think it was the name of that, and it was like nothing else in its day. And of course, then they made the newer Star Wars movies that are more appealing to a younger generation. Even though older people still like the Star Wars, but I grew up in the Star Wars era as well. But when I was a kid, Star Trek was popular. I've always kind of been a Star Trek fan, and the older Star Trek especially. But that's not really our message tonight. So that message, that term, resistance is futile, comes from a enemy of the Starship Enterprise and of the Federation called the Borg. And there was actually a Star Trek movie made around this concept called First Contact, I think it was, where the Borg are encountering in the Star Trek, and they're having a battle with the Borg, and different episodes, different shows in the more modern Star Treks have the feature of the Borg as one of the worst enemies the Federation ever faced. And if you don't know anything about Star Trek, you probably wouldn't know anything I'm talking about today, but most Americans have some concept of Star Trek. But the Borg basically are this cyborg is really what they are. They're a part um, technological machine and part organic. And one of the things that the Borg do when they come into an encounter with an organic life form or a universe is they will say, resistance is futile. We will assimilate your organic form into our collective. And I've really felt for a number of years. I remember years ago I was sharing a message where I said I believe in the future we will literally have technology that is embedded into our bodies, where we are literally connected to computers and able to function, and there's a union between human beings and computer technology. Now, believe me, when I said that at the time, I wasn't, um, technology was really nowhere in any capacity to where it is today. But yet, as I look back at that concept, I'm seeing that this is really becoming a living reality in our hour. But I want to address that concept of the Borg, basically the concept of collectivism, the concept of what I think we are seeing going on in our nation and around the globe right now. Since the explosion of smartphone technology, um, and the internet especially, we have literally seen the world shrink before our eyes. Now, there are good things about that. I think of our dear brothers and sisters in Tanzania, Africa, that we are ministering to and been able to start a Bible school there. We met those brothers through our website years ago, dear brother Paphras and brothers there in Africa. And we've been able to minister to them. And the internet has been a great tool in reaching and sharing the gospel with our brothers and sisters and reaching people around the world. It is a tremendous tool for proclaiming the gospel. But we realize that almost everything in this world, because it is in a fallen world, we're living in a fallen world, that everything in this fallen world becomes prey and subject often to the enemy. And what does, of course, the enemy do? The enemy corrupts, perverts, and twists and uses what God possibly intended or originally intended for good. He twists and perverts it and turns it around for evil. And so the enemy of course, uses the internet for every sort of perversion under the sun, whether it's human trafficking, sexual pornography, perversion of every sort, violence and bloodshed. It is a terrible, terrible weapon as well. So I've felt for a number of years that this idea of this combination of technology and human organic being would merge into something that is not really good. Now, there is some developments, and I'm not going to get too deep into this, but we've recently seen some developments where through artificial intelligence and the union of human beings with technology, that we're literally looking at a future where people that are paralyzed will be able to walk with the aid of technology. People that can't see will have be able to possibly have implants where they will be able to see. People that can't hear, we're already seeing this where people have implants in their hearing, and are people who have never heard in their life are suddenly able to hear because of this technology. All sorts of technological breakthroughs in areas that are making people able to live longer, be more, and different things like that. And much of that can be good, and praise be to God in helping people. But of course, again, with the good always comes the evil. These type of things are always good if they're governed by morals, if they're governed by God's standards. But things in the wrong hands that even sound good become evil and diabolical. Throughout history, people who have done outrageous things and outlandish things, the most evil, unspeakable things to people throughout history, have done those things believing, fully convinced that they were serving the better cause of humanity. And we look at those things, we were aghast that these people would actually believe that they were doing right, even though they slaughtered millions upon millions upon millions of people. They believed in their mind that they were doing right. And so I'm convinced that there are many people today that believe fully that they are doing the right things in helping humanity. But in reality, I believe they're evil, and I believe they don't realize they're evil, and they're deceived. One of the things that we are seeing all over the world today is the perpetration of evil. The Bible says in the last days, evil men will become worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived. So the Borg, the concept behind the Borg is to bring the organic and technological into a union. The Borg would say, we will assimilate you into our collective. And so what happens is when the Borg meet an organic life form, like when they would meet humans or another species, so to speak, they would assimilate them. And what, of course, the natural outcome of that is that the technological aspect would swallow the organic. The organic was always subservient to the technological aspect. And along with that, people would no longer have individualism. You were part of the collective, and as such, you thought as a collective. You only thought in the respect of the collective. And so we are seeing this kind of mindset literally infiltrating, and not just infiltrating, we're seeing it exploding in our hour right now. And it's almost surreal. It's almost like a Borg moment that we're facing in our country today. Uh, for instance, we have companies today that, and of course, this is happening in Europe and in other parts of the world. Many people think this is great, and that is the idea of microchipping everyone, giving the whole world a personal identification through microchipping or other sort of technological advancements to put the entire world on a grid so that the world is completely connected. I remember hearing these men talk years ago that there is a push, and this is already happening, to connect all the cities of the world on a grid so that they're all connected in some way, shape, or form. Um, this push also, there's been a push for many years to move everyone around the world into cities, because if you're in a city, then the idea is you leave less of a carbon footprint. Now, what you don't realize, most people don't realize, is almost all of the push for climate change, all of the push for all of this Green New Deal, all of these things, they're really not in their ultimate form about saving the planet. Lenin said, referred to people who were useful to the advancement of communism, useful idiots. And unfortunately, we have a lot of useful idiots in the world who really have been inundated with propaganda. The world is not going to come to an end through climate change. Climate change is not a global emergency. This is all nonsense. It is all propaganda. And when you hear that say, well, most, 99% of scientists agree. No, they don't. This is all nonsense. This is another example of how an idea gets put into the media spins it, academia gets behind it, and then we push it as the gospel truth, as if this is a done deal. Oh yes, if you're a climate denier, you're crazy. The climate change is going to destroy the world. That's nonsense. It's absolute stupidity. It's absolute insanity. We are not, the climate is not going to destroy the world. The world has gone through hotter times than it is right now. The climate, almost all, let me just say this, almost all of the climate alarmism is based upon climate computer models. This is what it's based on, computer models. The only problem with those computer models is they're not accurate. They've been proven to be false time and time and time again because they don't align with the real world. But yet we have these computer models that are telling us, oh, the world's going to burn up and we're all going to die. And of course, now every single thing that happens in the climate, in nature, is deemed, oh, this is an example of climate change. And if we don't do something, the world's going to come to an end. And so the idea of what they want the world to do, of course, ultimately is always this: surrender your freedom to the governments of the world so the governments of the world can run things. So, in other words, we're supposed to pay billions of dollars as a nation into some global entity that's going to monitor the globe. The only thing with that is we know, of course, China is not going to buy into that. Other nations are not going to buy into it. The other problem with it, what we have right now, is by limiting energy, we impoverish and bankrupt and keep the poor poor and the rich rich. Um, and much of the technology that we hear screaming about doesn't work to begin with. All this nonsense about electric cars, and nonsense about solar energy and wind energy. It costs more and is more polluting to create those than we get out of them. It's just utter insanity. And yet people buy into this. People are sold this. They act as if it's the gospel truth. All of these fires out in California right now. People, oh, this is an example of climate change, and if we don't do something right now, if we don't, this is a common thing. If we don't do something right now, the world is going to come to an end. Even if we were to shut down all the fossil fuels in the world right now, if we were to stop burning all fossil fuels, period, right now, and crash the economies of the world, it wouldn't make any difference. It would take thousands of years to make any difference, because the truth of the matter is, that is not out there, is human beings contribute very little to the climate warming of the earth. And the fact of the matter is, it's good that the earth is warm because we can grow more things. And of course, we always hear, well, we're having flooding and the seas are rising. It's all lies, 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 lies. And the problem is people are just getting their information from a few sources. They get it from the mainstream media and climate alarmists and people that say the world is going to come to an end through climate change. It's nonsense. It's just utter stupidity. And I'm not afraid to say that because it's simply true. But going back to what we're talking, got on a rant there, didn't I? Going back to what I was saying, this is all part of pushing the world into a globalist, communist, collectivist, Borg type of entity where the individual's rights are trampled on for the sake of the climate. The individual's rights are trampled on for the sake of the collective. And so we see today in our nation, and this has become so apparent in the last year, and I keep going back to the last year because the last year it seems as we have kicked into warp speed. There has been this incredible push by our government over the last year, abuse of power like we have not seen in my lifetime, trampling on the Constitution, shutting people's small businesses down, limiting where you can go, who you can have over at your house, limiting your travel. These are all things that when you hear of government officials telling you these things in the name of keeping us safe, that should bother anybody. First of all, it's not the government's responsibility to keep me safe. It's not, the government is not our caretaker. The government serves the people, not the other way around. And if the government is doing things that is destroying your livelihood, destroying your businesses, causing people literally to die because of suicide rates are through the roof, and all of these things that are once again worse off because the government is involved, then that should make people wake up and take notice. So we're talking about taking the future seriously. And what we should really recognize is there is a global push right now among very wealthy elitists in the world that are power hungry and very greedy and simply evil. We really need to start calling evil what it is, and it is evil. There are people in our government right now, there are people in the nations that they're just plain evil. They're not just corrupt, they're evil. And they have evil intentions. They don't care about human life. They don't really care about you. They don't really care about your well-being. And Americans are delusional in imagining that many people in Washington are doing what's in our best interest. Listen, Washington hasn't been doing what's in our best interest for decades. It's not about the American people's best interest, because if it was we would really do things that make a difference, that matter. But instead, what do? We spend a bunch of money and waste money and give it to our buddies to bail them out and help them. Just like these COVID stimulus bills that we had come out. What is it? Three of them came out, two or three. These, about 16% of the billions and billions, not literally trillions, I should say, 16% of the trillions of dollars that were spent for so-called COVID relief, they didn't go to us. They went to foreign entities. They went to Planned Parenthood. They went to propping up blue states that locked all their businesses down and are losing revenue. They went to buddies of people in power. This is absolutely corrupt to the core. And instead, what do we end up with? We end up with about $22 trillion in printed money that the federal government has printed over the last year, plunging us further into debt that our grandchildren will have to pay for if our nation survives the economic consequences of this enormous debt that has been racked up over the years. So we should recognize that when we have corporations right now pushing to microchip people, pushing to bring everybody into an identity system, and really this whole push to vaccinate people, to push this vaccine, this has nothing to do with keeping you safe. First of all, we really, and I realize this video might get banned because this should be an alarming thing to people as well, that if you say something that someone disagrees with, suddenly it shouldn't be out there because it's misinformation. Well, listen, the greatest perpetrators of misinformation right now is our federal government. We have a federal government that is blatantly lying to the American people. And I used to kind of grimace when I said that, but I don't anymore because it's just facts. Um, and they're in collusion with the big corporate media that are lying to the American people. And you may say, Pastor Tim, I thought this was a gospel message. Well, we're talking about taking the future seriously. And we have to talk about real things in real life. And I'm not trying to steal your faith, and I'm not trying to steal your joy. I'm just trying to bring you the reality of the world in which we live in relationship to this idea of the collectivism. So what we are really seeing is a push to bring America right now under a totalitarian regime. The whole globe is really being pushed into this direction. And if we have to recognize that throughout history, totalitarian regimes have always incorporated a form of statism where the ruling class demand complete subjection and loyalty to those who are not ruling. And this is really what we see going on in the nation of the United States and many nations of the world today, where we have a ruling class that has been in power for many, many years, like many people in Washington, such as Nancy Pelosi, who have been in Washington, Joe Biden, who's been in Washington almost 50 years. Now, are you really telling me that somebody that's been in Washington, D.C. for 50 years in that cesspool of an environment, that they really understand what Americans are going through, that they really have a sympathy for American people? Are you really telling me that somebody that hasn't held a real job in the real world for almost 50 years is suddenly qualified to lead our nation and tell common working blue collar Americans and common working people that I'm here to help you out, when in reality you don't have the foggiest clue, because you haven't run a business for decades and you don't have a clue as to what's going on in the real world, and nor do you care. So totalitarian regimes have always incorporated a form of statism, and you may not know what statism is. That's not a word we hear commonly in our country. I think I've heard, I know I've heard Ben Shapiro speak of statism a number of times, but when you talk of statism, you're really talking about fascism. Now, you have to recognize that fascism, communism, socialism, we hear a lot of talk today about socialism, and I really wish we'd stop talking about socialism, and I really wish we would start talking about fascism and communism. Now, when Donald Trump took office, we had the left yelling, he's a fascist, he's a fascist, we got to stop fascism, Trump is a fascist, because the left in America have no clue what fascism is. As a matter of fact, most people don't have a clue as to what fascism is, because the only thing they think fascism is racism. They think racism and fascism are one and the same. Where classical fascism throughout history had nothing to do with racism. That's not what fascism is centered on. Now, Hitler went out to exterminate the Jews, we understand, but that wasn't because of fascism. Now, let me say it this way: fascism became a racial type of thing under Hitler, but it didn't start out as a racist type of thing under Hitler, nor did it start out. Mussolini is the one that invented fascism. Mussolini, who was the ruler of Italy prior to World War II, Mussolini was well loved. He was loved by the Western progressive press. Woodrow Wilson thought Mussolini was a great leader. There was one time that the elites in Hollywood, the elites in Washington, really thought of Mussolini. He should be the president of the world. They thought he was fantastic. They loved fascism. Fascism was extremely popular. Woodrow Wilson was a fascist, and Woodrow Wilson instituted, by the way, a Democrat, instituted a fascist policies during World War One, where he censored people's speech. Um, Really, Franklin Roosevelt held to fascist beliefs. As a matter of fact, Franklin Roosevelt, in many ways, was a fascist. And in Germany, prior to World War II, the German newspapers called Franklin Roosevelt America's little fascist, because fascism was not considered an evil thing at that time. It was very popular. It was considered something that everybody wanted, and not everybody, but the progressive left was into fascism. So it's ironic today that we have, like so many things, the progressive left calls conservatives fascists, when in fact, conservative ideology cannot be fascism, because fascism is not about racism. Fascism is about collectivism. And so we have countries like Nazi Germany, Stalin's Russian gulags, communist China, Mussolini's fascist Italy. These are all examples of totalitarian regimes, and they all grew out of the same evil tree, which is communism, socialism, fascism, statism. They all have that in common, that they all are basically into statism. Now, statism is basically the idea that the state is um, is the one that runs everything, that everything is of the state. The state is the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-seeing Oz. And so, back again, just ironic that the left, when Trump came into power, they were calling Trump a fascist, where Trump did nothing in his presidency that indicated he was a fascist in any way, shape, or form. I mean, you had people on the left saying, "Oh, he's going to take away my rights." What rights did anybody lose under Trump? If it wasn't Trump that shut down the government last year, it wasn't Trump that limited people's travel. It's not Trump that is taking away people's rights. It was the left, and it always has been the left. So contrary to the left's claims about Trump being a fascist, it's just nonsense. So going back to Mussolini's Italy and Hitler's Germany, they hired youth thug gangs to go out and bully and strong arm people that disagreed with their policies. Anyone who resisted. Under Mussolini, he had the black shirts. Under Hitler, he had the brown shirts. And they would literally go out and beat people to a pulp, assault people, murder people who were problematic, who were rabble rousers. Now, we have going back in the United States, basically the equivalent of this would have been the Ku Klux Klan, which the KKK, which the Democrats don't like to talk about, the KKK was the strong arm militia of the Democrat Party to intimidate white voters who were supporting black, liberties. That's really what it was about. It was about going out and bullying white people who would dare support blacks, and of course putting fear into black people. The KKK was of the Democrat Party. That's where it came from. It's amazing in our country today that we're all about cancel culture and tearing down monuments. These really useful idiots tearing down monuments, destroying our country, yet they never hold the Democrat Party responsible for all of its evils throughout our history. The Democrat Party is the party of Jim Crow. The Democrat Party is the party of racial segregation. The Democrat Party is the party of the KKK. And the Democrat Party today is the party of Antifa. And so today, if we come up to what is fascism today, and I know this isn't popular, and I know that this might tick some people off, but I've said it for many years. I don't believe Christians have any business today voting for a Democrat. I believe the Democrat Party has become completely corrupted. Now, I realize there are some good Democrats at the local level, but one of the things I found with the Democratic Party is they will follow Democrats no matter what, whereas Republicans won't. Now, the Republican Party has its own problems, but the Democrat Party's history alone should cause somebody to take uh, should just take step back and uh, and again, you say, well, Pastor Tim, I thought we're not supposed to be. I have every right to speak. I'm not endorsing a candidate. This is a moral issue. Uh, I don't know how anybody can support a party that is openly championing the murder of children in the womb. And the Democrat Party, if it were not for the Democrat Party, we would have ended abortion in America years ago. But it's the Democrat Party that champions the cause of abortion. It's the Democrat Party right now under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris that is using our tax dollars to pay for abortion on demand and giving money to a ruthless uh, organization called Planned Parenthood, which has nothing to do with parenthood or planning. The only thing it does is kills babies. It's not a woman's health fraternity. It doesn't. It masquerades as helping women. There's nothing it does that helps women except to kill their babies. That's all it is, and it's a horrible, evil institution, and uh, and so on and so forth. Now I know this is not popular, but I'm just going to speak the truth because this stuff we flower this stuff up, we sugarcoat it, and frankly, if you're voting for people that support abortion and you claim to be a Christian, you ought to repent. You need to repent, and I'm not mincing words here. That's just fact. So praise God. That's why I do not support Democrats, and I cannot vote for that party. It's a party of death. So anyhow, this will probably get me kicked off Facebook for good. But anyhow, today's fascist arm, Antifa, is basically the arm of the Democrat Party today. Um, you'll never hear a Democrat renounce Antifa. I've heard a number of Republicans calling on, for instance, I think it was Jim Jordan calling on the Democrats to renounce Antifa. Joe Biden would not renounce Antifa during the presidential debates with President Trump. He would not renounce Antifa. Why wouldn't they renounce Antifa? As a matter of fact, I've heard of leftist news anchors defending Antifa as somehow some virtuous organization. It's ironic, this very organization that's Antifa, anti-fascist, are basically fascists. They are beating people up, they're assaulting people. They are the equivalent, they are the Democrat modern equivalent of the brown shirts of Germany. That's what they do. I just read an article just this week about how they were assaulting, pepper spraying a bunch of church people who were gathered, and the media was treating them like they're heroes. Pepper spraying children, assaulting women and children, and these are nothing but cowards. and they bully people. They don't pick on people that can fight back. They always go after people that can't fight back or are unarmed, because that's what they are. They're cowards. And so Antifa is an evil organization. They are basically modern day fascists. So fascism, socialism, communism, they're all part of the same evil tree of satanic totalitarianism leading to oppression. And over the past year, we've witnessed some of the most egregious abuses of power by the federal and state governments in the history of the United States. Mandates, lockdowns, vaccine passports that are being pushed right now. These are all a push to assimilate into a state-run totalitarian form of government, where the individual is forced to submit to the powerful state. These are all designed to intimidate individuals to surrender their freedoms to the state. That's what they're all about. We had last year in 2020, we had drones flying over people saying social distance. We had people refused entry into buildings if they weren't wearing a cloth diaper over their face, and it doesn't do anything to begin with. It's all, again, it's all keeping up the facade. It's all play acting. And you may not like that, you may not agree with it, but it's simply a fact. It does not stop this virus. It does not protect people. But what it does do is it separates people. It makes people suspicious of other people. It makes people imagine that there's this deadly virus that's going to kill you if you do not wear this. It's protecting you. And in fact, it's not protecting you. It's not protecting you at all. And what it's doing is it's dividing people. And the reason for it, this is actually an old communist ploy to divide people along race, to divide people along the line of different areas so that they fight against each other. And this is what it's all about. So now what we have is the maskers and anti-maskers. We have the vaxxers and anti-vaxxers. We have pro-life and pro-abortion. So our country is, we have, the idea that, well, it's black people versus white people. It's Asian people versus Hispanic people. It's always this attempt to divide us. And that's what these people do. These are rules for radicals, right out of Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals. So fear is always the weapon of the enemy to pressure people into compliance. First, it was fear of dying from a virus. Now it's fear of losing your job if you don't take a vaccine. But it's fear of losing your job if you don't take an experimental gene therapy injection. Next is fear of not being able to travel. Fear of saying something the state or corporate media or woke deranged society deems as outside the prescribed narrative. Now it's fear of reprisals if we refuse to bow and burn a pinch of incense to Caesar. This is all pressure to get you to conform, to obey without question, that when the so-called experts tell you something, you should listen to them. So for the last year, we've had lie after lie, deception after deception, misinformation after misinformation that's all been proven fake, has all been proven phony, and yet we're told that we need to continue. We're finding that this vaccine is not stopping the spread of this virus, and yet we have a president right now pushing, mandating, saying that if you don't get this vaccine, you can't travel, you can't come into the United States. Now we're pushing it on our military, our healthy young men and women, that their chances of dying from this virus is about zero. And the idea that this is going to save you, so we have to, but this is really not, has nothing to do with keeping you safe. What it has to do with is getting you to comply, obey, and put you into a data system so that you can be controlled. Going back to Mussolini, let me read you a few things about statism, because I got off on a tangent there. Mussolini said, and this is a few quotes by Mussolini, this may shock you. He says, all within the state, nothing outside the state, nothing against the state. That is fascism. Fascism is all about the state, statism. It's about obeying and complying and the collective of the state. So that was Mussolini's philosophy for fascism in Italy. And we're seeing the rise of that in our country today. All within the state, nothing outside the state, nothing against the state. In other words, if a state tells you you can't go to work, oh, I can't go to work. The state says you can't gather with your neighbors, oh, I can't go gather with my neighbors. The state says you can't go here, you can't go there. I have to obey the state. What gives anybody, the CDC, what gives the CDC the right to make any rules? They have no jurisdiction. They have no authority. They're not a governing body. They're not the legislative branch of government. Well, the CDC mandated. Who cares? What are they? And they've been proven wrong and wrong, wrong, wrong constantly. And so, but we're supposed to bow down and, oh, they said it, so we all ought to stop. We ought to know by now that the so-called experts are continually, always, almost always wrong. And I love what Thomas Sowell in his book Intellectuals in Society really talks about this a lot, how that throughout history, the so-called intellectuals in elites in society, they make things worse because they don't know what they're talking about. They don't know what they're doing. This is another quote by Mussolini. He said, "Fascism conceives of the state as an absolute, in comparison with which all individuals or groups are relative, only to be conceived in the relation to the state." Do you hear what it says there? In other words, individualism is not is all meant to be brought under the power of the collective. Now, notice what we have going on right now with when I was railing about climate change, because right now we have an infrastructure bill that's before the Senate that, from all outward appearance, is going to be passed. The infrastructure bill is basically, let's just put it bluntly, the infrastructure bill is basically a wolf in sheep's clothing. It is the Green New Deal and the Equality Act rolled into something called infrastructure. Again, when you think of infrastructure, most people think of infrastructure building roads and highways and things like that, deteriorating structures, bridges. That's not what this is about. There's only about 15 to 20% of this is going toward those things. Everything else is all about climate regulations, taxation, giving illegal immigrants uh, protected status, giving them citizenship so they can vote. It's all this kind of nonsense. It's not about infrastructure, but it's all about bringing the United States under this thing. So he says fascism conceives of the state as an absolute in comparison with which all individuals or groups or relatives only to be conceived in the relation to the state. In other words, you're there to serve the state's not there to serve you. This is a lot like corporate America is right now. You're there to serve the machine instead of the machine serving you. Here's another thing Benito Mussolini said: against individualism, the fascists' conception is for the state, and it is for the individual insofar as he coincides, with the state. Let me read that again. Against individualism, the fascist conception is for the state, and it is for the individual insofar as he coincides with the state. It is opposed to classical liberalism. Liberalism denied the state in the interests of the particular individual. Fascism reaffirms the state as the true reality of the individual. In other words, the individual must be made subservient to the state. Now, it's quite ironic that in our age of hyper individualism, where it's all about me, it's all about me, myself, and I, this hyper individualism, that we are literally, individualism is being swallowed by statism, this collectivism, what we call woke, what we call cancel culture, what we call all of these things. Cancel culture is basically a manifestation of statism. It's a push to bring you into the collective. If you don't speak the prescribed narrative, if you don't follow the prescribed narrative as put out by corporate media, as put out by Hollywood, as put out by the state, as put out by these, then you're canceled. You're going to lose your platform. You're going to be deplatformed. You're going to lose your place on the internet. You're not going to be able to speak. If you say something somebody happens to be offended at, if you say something that doesn't fit the prescribed narrative, you're going to lose your job. We see this constantly, 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 constantly. You're going to lose your position. You're going to lose your voice. And this is what's happening. This is statism, which is basically fascism, communism, socialism. Same thing. It's all totalitarianism. Now, let me read a scripture to you out of Revelation. It's kind of interesting. Revelation chapter 13, and Christians, you should know where I'm going with this. Revelation 13, verse 1 through 10. It says, I saw that one of the heads of the beast seemed wounded beyond recovery, but the fatal wound was healed. The whole world marveled at his marvelous at this miracle and gave allegiance to the beast. They worshiped the dragon for giving the beast such power. And they also worshiped the beast, who is this great beast? They exclaimed, who is able to fight against him? So here again we have a picturesque type of illustration of this beast This beast is a person, but the beast also represents a system of government. And the world is marveling at this beast. It's marveling at this beast, and it says it gives its allegiance to the dragon. The dragon is what gives the beast its power. The dragon, the devil, is the dragon. The devil is what gives world totalitarian its power. Throughout history, it was always the devil who is the god of this world, who is behind oppressive totalitarian regimes. The devil who is behind communist China, killing millions of people, Mao Zedong, the current regime that is slaughtering people, torturing people, locking people by the thousands in concentration camps, harvesting their body parts, and brutally raping and murdering people. That's communism today, by the way. We have the gulags of Russia that took 20 million people and shipped them off to the gulags, and most of them never returned again. Many of them were simply people that somebody reported they said something. Throughout history, totalitarian regimes have always been ruled by the dragon, and they give their allegiance to the dragon. They're anti-Christ, they're anti-Christian, they're anti-freedom. And we've seen these throughout history. And then look at verse 5. It says, Then the beast was allowed to speak great blasphemies against God, and he was given authority to do whatever he wanted for 42 months, 3.5 years. Now, this is also referring to a beast system and the beast called the Antichrist, who will come to power in the future. Paul called him the man of perdition. Paul said he was against God and speaks blasphemies against the God of heaven. And he spoke terrible words of blasphemy against God, slandering his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. It was ironic. A friend of mine posted something on Facebook just today showing these atheists that are they take turns blaspheming the God of heaven. You know, if the God of heaven doesn't exist, isn't this an exercise in stupidity? If there is no such thing, if there is no God, then why would you do such a stupid thing? If there is no God, why would it matter to you? But obviously, the reason it matters to them is the existence of God threatens their security. It threatens their kingdom. He threatens the God of this world that they serve, and that's why they blaspheme him. You don't see them blaspheming Allah. You don't see them blaspheming Muhammad. You don't see them blaspheming Confucius or other gods, but it's all aimed at the God of the Bible, because it's the God of the Bible that's the true and living God. It's Jesus Christ that threatens people's security, because he's the King of all kings and the Lord of all lords. He is the one who has authority over the kingdom of darkness and would put down Satan's rule. So he spoke terrible words of blasphemy against God, slandered his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. And the beast was allowed to wage war against God's holy people and conquer them, and he was given authority to rule over every tribe and people and language and nation. And all the world who belong to the world worship the beast. They are the ones whose names are not written in the book of life that belongs to the Lamb who was slaughtered before the world was made. So as a believer, if I speak very strong words, it's because I am against the system of this world. I'm against the Antichrist kingdom and his rule. And we are seeing people seduced by the Antichrist spirit of this age that is building toward a global totalitarian Antichrist system. I mean, we may see the rise of the Antichrist in our lifetime. We may see the kingdom of darkness come into full manifestation in this hour. We have never seen the world coming into union like we are today and being manipulated and brought. So one of two things is going to happen. God is going to be merciful to the world, merciful to us, and we are going to see a great breaking of these powers and God putting them under dominion. Or we are going to see the rise and continued proliferation of evil and the manifestation of the man called the man of perdition, the Antichrist. And we're going to see the ushering in of the Antichrist kingdom. And we're going to see a persecution upon the world as we've never seen. And this shouldn't surprise us, because literally we're seeing a persecution upon Christians in the world as we've never seen anyhow. There are more Christians dying for their faith right now in the Antichrist world than have in the whole history of the world. More Christians today are being persecuted. Christians are the most persecuted people group upon the planet. In over 50 countries of the world, it is against the law to be a Christian, and you are severely persecuted for your faith. Well, we have to wrap this up tonight. So it says here, anyone who has ears to hear should listen and understand. Anyone who is disdained for prison are destined for prison will be taken into prison. Anyone who is destined to die by the sword will die by the sword. This means that God's holy people must endure persecution patiently and remain faithful. So we realize that we are heading toward this antichrist system. And I'm not saying that what we're seeing right now is the full manifestation of this, but we see the pressure of this, and we see throughout history. If we just take a look at history, we will see that throughout history these things have come about. Communism, fascism, uh, the Roman Empire, where you were forced to go out and burn a pinch of incense before Caesar to to show your allegiance. Right now, we have a similar thing where you're supposed to wear this face cover to show your allegiance, and you're protecting everybody. Now it's this nonsensical vaccine. And again, if you want to take a vaccine, that's your business, but you have no right to force other people to take it, especially when it's not going to keep you safe to begin with if they take it. So and if you've taken the vaccine, I'm not criticizing you. I'm not putting you down. That's your choice. What I am putting down, what I'm really talking about here, is the fact that we're trying to force people to take a vaccine that cannot is not guaranteed to help them anyhow. And most people who, when we have alternative treatments to this virus, and I know these aren't popular things to say, and I realize that people are maybe getting honked off of what I say, and that's fine. That's fine. You're entitled to your opinion, as I am to mine. The problem I'm having in this country is that we're censoring people that have an opinion that is not the prescribed narrative. That is the dangerous thing. When someone says something that honks someone off, or they disagree with or dislike, you have every right to shut them off. You don't have to tune in to listen to me, and you don't have to hear what I have to say, and that's your choice. But you don't have a right to censor me. You don't have a right to take me off the air. You don't have a right. I'm not saying anything that's hateful. I'm just speaking truth. I'm saying stuff that's criticizing people. I'm saying stuff that's criticizing persons in government and so on. And I have every right to do that. I'm not calling for violence. I'm not calling for hatred toward people. I don't hate anybody. I don't like evil, and I hate deception. And I don't like the fact that people are being lied to and manipulated. And that's my beef with this. So praise be to God. Um, we're, I wanted to get a bunch of stuff out there tonight. These are things that I think that we need to hear. They're not pleasant things. They're not things that make you want to shout and run around a building. But we are living in perilous times, and we have to wake up. We have to get our head out of the sand, and we have to realize that we are going to face persecution, and these things are coming about. And if we recognize them, then we'll realize that it's time for us to resist. And resistance is not futile. If we do not resist evil, we will be ruled by evil. All it takes for evil to prevail is for good men and women to do nothing. Edmund Burke said that. Well, God bless you. We love you, and have a blessed, blessed evening. Bye-bye.